It was exactly 9:30 on a chilly Tuesday morning when the phone rang. The shrill sound cut through the quiet apartment like a blade, startling me so badly that I nearly dropped the mug of tea I had been holding. Normally, I did not answer calls before 10. The early mornings were my sacred time to gather my thoughts, make a plan for the day, and get my son ready for school without interruptions. But something in the way the phone rang, sharp and urgent, made me pick it up instantly, my heart already beginning to race. On the other end was a voice that sounded official, sterile, and distant, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had been trained to strip away personal comfort and emotion before delivering a message. "This is the Child Welfare Office," the voice began, calm but firm. "We are here to inform you that your child will be temporarily taken into protective custody. You are required to comply with our instructions immediately." For a moment, my brain refused to process the words. The sound of my own heartbeat seemed deafening in my ears. I do not understand," I said, my voice trembling. "Temporary? Taken? There must be some mistake." There was no hesitation in the reply. "We understand your concern, but this is a matter of procedure. Please follow our instructions. Further communication will be provided shortly." The line went dead before I could ask a single question. I stared at the phone, unable to move, unable to breathe. My son, Benjamin, was playing with his toy cars on the living room carpet, oblivious to the call that had just shattered the fragile sense of security I had built around our little life. I wanted to tell myself it was a mistake, that someone had confused our address with another family, that the world had not suddenly turned against me. But deep down, I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. This was not a prank, not from someone I knew, and not something that could simply be ignored. I ran to the bedroom where Benjamin's small bed was neatly made. It was empty. Panic clawed at me as I realized that even if the phone call had been a mistake, the implication was terrifying. Someone, somewhere, had the authority to take my child from me. I called my son's name, my voice breaking with each syllable, but only the faint sound of his toys rolling across the floor answered me. Minutes passed like hours. I searched the apartment frantically, checking every corner, every closet, even the bathroom, hoping that he had wandered off somewhere, and this was all a terrible misunderstanding. But my rational mind could not hold on to hope. The silence of the apartment felt oppressive, almost mocking, as if it were aware of my fear and was feeding on it. I dialed the number back, but it went straight to voicemail. I left a message, pleading for clarification, for anyone to tell me that Benjamin was safe, that I had misheard, that this nightmare was not real. There was no response, only the buzzing in my ears and the cold sweat clinging to my skin. I sat down heavily on the couch, gripping my head in my hands. I remembered the countless articles I had read about child protection agencies, about how misunderstandings could escalate, about how a single report from a neighbor or a teacher could trigger an investigation that seemed unstoppable. I thought about my life, my small apartment, the long hours I had spent working multiple jobs to provide for Benjamin after his father had left. Had I failed somehow without even knowing it? Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. I had lost all sense of time. My phone rang again, but this time it was my neighbor. Her voice was tentative, almost whispering. I saw some men outside your building. They were in suits, and they had a car with dark windows. They looked official." She hesitated, then added, "I think they might have taken your son." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I could barely breathe. I wanted to scream, to run outside, to demand answers, but I knew that whatever steps I took next would need to be calculated. Panic could make me lose control, and I needed Benjamin back. I needed him safe. I immediately began contacting everyone I could think of, local police, my lawyer, anyone who could help. But every call brought bureaucracy. Every question bounced back with vague reassurances that did little to calm the terror tightening around my heart. Each conversation felt like a maze. Every person I spoke to a gatekeeper who held part of the truth but refused to give it to me fully. By the evening, I was exhausted, my mind a storm of fear, anger, and disbelief. I could not sleep. The thought of Benjamin in someone else's hands, of not knowing if he was frightened, hungry, or crying, kept me awake in a state of frantic vigilance. I checked the apartment over and over, listened at every door, and even set up a makeshift camera in the living room, hoping to capture any clue of his whereabouts. The next morning, I contacted an attorney I had never spoken to before, a woman known for taking on cases where parents were fighting for custody under unusual circumstances. She listened patiently as I recounted everything from the phone call to the empty apartment and the men my neighbor had seen. Her expression was calm, almost unreadable, and then she said, "We start by documenting everything, every call, every interaction, every step you've taken. Then we file for an emergency injunction. This is going to be a long process, but it's the only way to challenge them." Her words were practical, but my mind refused to calm. Each instruction she gave felt like a reminder of how powerless I was, how fragile our little family had become in the face of faceless authority. Yet, amidst the fear, a small spark of resolve ignited inside me. I would not let them take Benjamin without a fight. I would prove that this was a mistake. Over the next several days, we began preparing our case. I gathered documents, proof of residency, medical records, and character references. Each piece of paper I handed to my attorney felt like a lifeline, a thread connecting me to the possibility of regaining my son. But the process was grueling, filled with moments that tested my patience and my faith. Each unanswered call, each vague response from officials, each time someone said, "We are looking into it," deepened the pit of fear and helplessness in my chest. The hearings began, small and procedural at first, with questions that seemed trivial but carried the weight of Benjamin's safety in them. I sat in the courtroom, trying to remain composed, feeling every eye on me, every judge's look measuring my worth as a parent. The experience was surreal. My life had been reduced to testimony, evidence, and legal argument, while the child I loved most in the world remained just beyond my reach. One afternoon, during a recess, I returned to the nearly empty apartment to gather more documents. I wandered through the rooms, touching the objects Benjamin had left behind. His small blue blanket, the stack of picture books he loved, the little toy cars scattered across the carpet. Each item was a memory, a reminder of our bond, and a cruel counterpoint to the reality that he was no longer there. I sat on the floor and allowed myself to cry, for the first time since this nightmare had begun, for the helplessness, for the fear, for the possibility that this could become permanent. The following week brought small victories and setbacks. Some calls were returned, some papers acknowledged, but the longer Benjamin remained away, the more I noticed changes in myself. The tight knot of anxiety that never fully loosened, the constant vigilance over every message or phone call, the shadows of fear that lingered in every quiet moment. I began to understand, viscerally, what other parents might feel when confronted with the sudden loss of their child, not to death, but to the machinery of a system that could move faster than love could protect. And yet, through all the despair, through all the endless waiting and legal wrangling, a fragile determination persisted. I would not allow this to become my reality. I would navigate the labyrinth of procedures, forms, and hearings. I would find the threads that led to Benjamin, and I would pull him back to safety. The stakes had never been higher, but neither had my resolve. The days blurred into each other with a surreal consistency, each morning bringing the same gnawing uncertainty that had taken root in my chest. I woke before dawn, my body rigid with tension, my ears straining for the slightest sound outside the apartment, the crunch of shoes on the sidewalk, the faint hum of a car engine, anything that could hint at Benjamin. Even the soft patter of rain against the windows set my nerves on edge. Every shadow seemed suspicious. Every ring of the phone felt like a harbinger of either hope or heartbreak. My attorney, Catherine, became my lifeline. She was methodical and unflappable, a sharp contrast to the chaos of my emotions. She instructed me to remain meticulous, to log every interaction, every phone call, every document I received or sent. "This is how we win," she told me once, her voice firm. "Not with anger, not with panic, but with facts. Facts are more powerful than fear." I nodded, clinging to her words like a rope thrown into turbulent waters. Yet no amount of strategy could erase the ache in my heart, the void left by Benjamin's absence. I began attending hearings, first as an observer, then as a participant. The courtrooms were cold, sterile rooms with linoleum floors that squeaked underfoot and fluorescent lights that cast harsh, unforgiving shadows. Officials spoke in clipped, precise language, their words measured and exact, but lacking any warmth or empathy. I would sit there, clutching my notebook filled with evidence, feeling both invisible and exposed at the same time. Each mention of Benjamin's name made my throat tighten. Each procedural argument felt like a battle fought in slow motion, with stakes higher than anything I had ever faced before. The first few hearings were procedural, almost mundane in their formality. Questions about my living conditions, my income, my support system. Questions I could answer, but ones that seemed designed to chip away at me gradually. Every answer was scrutinized, every document dissected, and the legal language that rolled off the officials' tongues sounded like a foreign code I had to decipher under extreme pressure. And always, at the back of my mind, was the image of Benjamin, playing alone somewhere, perhaps confused, perhaps frightened. I began visiting the child welfare office regularly, trying to speak with caseworkers, seeking any scrap of information that could reassure me. Most interactions were polite but unhelpful. They would confirm that Benjamin was in safe custody, that he was being cared for, but they could not and would not provide details beyond that. It was as though they were speaking through a wall, giving me fragments of truth while keeping the rest hidden. Each visit left me exhausted, frustrated, and increasingly desperate. The loneliness was suffocating. Friends reached out at first, their voices filled with sympathy, but over time, even their concerns seemed to fade into polite distance. I could not blame them. How do you comfort someone when the danger is bureaucratic, invisible, and relentless? How do you explain the terror of knowing that your child, your very essence, is held somewhere out of reach, and that your every action, every word, every moment of hesitation could tip the scales in ways you cannot predict? Sleep became a rare commodity. I would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, imagining Benjamin's small hands clutching his blanket, imagining his frightened eyes searching for me in unfamiliar surroundings. The hours stretched endlessly. Sometimes I would dream of him, but even those dreams were tainted by fear, his face twisted in panic, and I would wake up with tears soaking my pillow. Then, one evening, a breakthrough, or at least what felt like one. Catherine called, her tone urgent but controlled. "They've requested an additional hearing," she said. "They need clarification on some of the documents we submitted. This is our chance to argue the case more directly." My heart leapt. It was an opportunity, though slim, to bring Benjamin back into my arms. But it was also terrifying. The idea of facing officials again, of being questioned, judged, dissected, was overwhelming. I could feel my stomach knotting just imagining it. The hearing arrived, and with it, a storm of emotions I had not anticipated. I was seated at a small wooden table, papers stacked neatly in front of me, Catherine beside me. Across the room sat the officials, their expressions neutral, their voices calm and precise. The first question came quickly, clipped and professional. Can you confirm the child's current living arrangements prior to removal? I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Benjamin lived with me, I said, my voice steady despite the tremor I felt inside. Our apartment at 27 Maple Street, apartment 4B, was his home. We have all necessary documentation, medical records, and school enrollment papers. He has been in my care since birth. They nodded, made notes, but the expressionless faces offered no reassurance. The questions continued about income, support system, neighbors, any reports of incidents. I answered as clearly and truthfully as I could. Every word felt like a weight pressing down on me. At times, I caught myself imagining Benjamin sitting in the courtroom beside me, silent but watching, and the thought brought tears to my eyes that I forced to stay hidden. During a recess, Catherine pulled me aside. "You're doing fine," she whispered. "Do not let the fear take over. Focus on the facts. Focus on him. That's all that matters." I nodded, grateful for her guidance, yet inside, the fear pulsed stronger than ever. Every minute without Benjamin felt like an eternity. Every hour a chasm of uncertainty and anguish. After what felt like days, though in reality was only a few hours, the hearing concluded. The judge did not make an immediate ruling. We were told that a decision would be rendered within a week. I left the courthouse with a hollow feeling, clutching my coat, my breath visible in the cold evening air, and the emptiness of the apartment waiting for me at home. Each step was heavy, weighed down by dread, by anticipation, by the constant, gnawing uncertainty. That week became the longest of my life. I spent my days gathering more documentation, calling caseworkers, pleading for updates, and my nights staring at the ceiling, listening to the city sounds outside, and imagining Benjamin somewhere, scared and alone. The weight of the unknown was relentless. I felt my strength dwindling, replaced by an anxious vigilance that left me tense, trembling, and exhausted. Then, just as the week drew to a close, Catherine called me with the news. "They've reviewed everything. There was an error in the initial report. The child was temporarily removed due to misinformation from a third party. They've acknowledged the mistake, and arrangements are being made for Benjamin to return to your care." Relief should have been overwhelming. I should have felt my knees give way. I should have wept in joy. But the relief was tangled with anger, exhaustion, and an enduring sense of violation. Benjamin had been taken, held somewhere beyond my reach, and though it was an error, the experience had left its mark. I realized then that even when a mistake is corrected, the consequences linger. The fear, the helplessness, the stress, it does not simply vanish with a returned child. The day Benjamin returned, I waited by the apartment door, pacing, my nerves taut. When the door finally opened and he stepped inside, clutching his small backpack, I froze. His eyes were wary, scanning the room, taking in every familiar object as though he were verifying that this world was still his. When he finally looked at me and whispered, "Mom," I felt an overwhelming mixture of relief, guilt, and sorrow. I wrapped him in my arms, holding him so tightly that I could barely breathe, and promised myself that I would never let him feel this fear again. Yet, even as I comforted him, I could not shake the awareness of what had transpired. The bureaucratic machinery had been indifferent to my love, to our bond, to the fear we both had experienced. The error had been corrected, yes, but the emotional impact was profound and lasting. I realized then that the real danger is not always physical. Sometimes it is the slow erosion of certainty, the relentless anxiety, the invisible wound inflicted by systems that claim to protect but can also frighten, confuse, and separate. That night, Benjamin slept peacefully in his bed, the room quiet except for the gentle hum of the heater. I sat beside him, watching, listening, my hand on his small shoulder. I thought about the weeks we had endured, the fear that had filled our lives, and the lessons we had learned. Love alone could not always protect him, but vigilance, preparation, and resilience could. And I vowed that from that day forward, I would guard him fiercely, teach him to understand the world's dangers, and never allow complacency to leave us vulnerable again. The apartment felt different the moment Benjamin returned. Everything was the same: the small couch, the stack of picture books, the tiny toy cars, but the air was heavier somehow, as if it carried the weight of the past weeks. I watched him carefully, noting the way he hesitated at the doorway, his small hand gripping the frame like an anchor to steady himself in a world that had betrayed his sense of safety. The instinct to protect him surged in me again, fierce and unrelenting, but beneath it lay a quiet, gnawing worry. What had those days done to him? At first, he was unusually quiet, retreating into his own world. He barely spoke, barely played, and when I tried to engage him, his responses were muted, almost mechanical. He would nod or answer softly, but there was an unfamiliar distance in his eyes, a cautiousness that I had never seen before. I realized with a sudden, sharp pang of recognition that fear could linger even when the danger was gone. The world had touched him, however briefly, and left invisible marks. I tried to maintain our routines, to recreate the small stability of life before the call, before the removal. Breakfast at 7:30, walks to school, homework sessions in the living room, bedtime stories at 9. But it was not enough. Benjamin flinched at loud noises, hesitated when answering the phone, and clung to me in ways he never had before. Each symptom was a tiny reminder that even a temporary separation could fracture a child's sense of security. I sought guidance from child psychologists, experts in trauma and recovery. Their advice was practical: patience, routine, reassurance, but also openness to discussing feelings, naming the fear, validating it. I followed every suggestion, reading books with him about feelings, drawing pictures together, role-playing scenarios where he could express what had scared him. Slowly he began to speak, hesitantly at first, then with more confidence, about what he remembered, what he felt. His words were fragmented, disjointed, but each one was a step toward reclaiming his sense of self. Meanwhile, my own recovery was more complicated. The relief that should have accompanied Benjamin's return was tangled with anger, resentment, and exhaustion. The system that had removed him, even mistakenly, had exposed a vulnerability I had not fully understood. That love alone does not shield against bureaucratic indifference. I found myself replaying every moment, every call, every interaction, wondering if I had done enough, if there had been signs I had missed, if somehow I had failed him. Sleep continued to elude me. I would wake in the middle of the night, heart pounding, imagining scenarios in which Benjamin was again taken, hidden, unreachable. The terror was no longer tied to immediate action. It had seeped into my psyche, a persistent shadow that lingered even in the safety of our home. Catherine, my attorney, noticed my exhaustion and tried to counsel me. "You've done everything you can. Now it's about care and rebuilding. Focus on the child, not the fear." I nodded, but the knot in my chest remained, stubborn and unyielding. As weeks passed, Benjamin's behavior gradually improved. He laughed again, played with his cars, and even asked for bedtime stories. But there were moments, fleeting but sharp, when the old fear would flare. A loud knock on the door, a sudden phone ring, a stranger in the hallway, each triggered an instinctive panic, a flinch, a question in his eyes that asked, silently, if the world would take him from me again. I held him close during those moments, whispering assurances, but I knew the imprint of those days would remain, shaping his perception of safety for years to come. The community began to notice our ordeal as well. Neighbors who had once passed by casually now offered small gestures of support, a cup of tea, a quiet word of encouragement, or just a smile in passing. I realized how fragile trust can be, not only between parent and child, but also between families and the systems meant to protect them. And I began to see the broader implications. How many other families had experienced similar traumas, perhaps without resolution, and how those moments could ripple through a child's life like invisible waves. I also confronted the people responsible for the removal, the officials who had enforced the erroneous decision. Meetings were tense, bureaucratic, filled with polite words and formal apologies, but lacking genuine acknowledgement of the psychological impact on my child. One official admitted, almost casually, that errors like these were not uncommon, that third-party reports often led to unnecessary interventions. The casualness of the admission ignited a rage I had not felt in weeks, a mixture of fear, anger, and indignation. How could a system designed to protect children be so careless, so impersonal, so unfeeling? It became clear that the recovery process was twofold: helping Benjamin regain his sense of security and helping myself process the anger, fear, and helplessness that had become entwined with every aspect of my life. I began journaling, writing down each incident, each emotion, each small victory and setback. Writing became a lifeline, a way to order the chaos in my mind and reclaim some measure of control. I realized that while the past weeks could not be undone, I could at least document them, learn from them, and prepare for the future. School routines helped both of us. Benjamin's teachers noticed subtle changes: his hesitancy in group activities, his need for reassurance, his newfound cautiousness with authority figures. We worked together to create a support plan, a network of adults he could trust, and gradually he began to participate more actively, regain confidence, and reestablish his social connections. Each small step was a victory. Each smile reclaimed a triumph over the fear that had gripped him. But despite progress, I remained vigilant. Every phone call, every official letter, every unfamiliar face near our apartment rekindled the primal fear of separation. It was an anxiety I could not switch off, a lingering shadow that reminded me that even a corrected mistake could leave lasting scars. I became hyper-aware of our environment, of who we interacted with, and of any signals that could indicate potential risks. It was exhausting, but necessary. The weeks of uncertainty had taught me that complacency was dangerous, that the world could be indifferent to love and effort, and that vigilance was a form of protection. Catherine reminded me often that the legal process was complete, that Benjamin was mine, and that the error had been officially acknowledged. But the acknowledgement did not erase the emotional impact. I realized that what mattered most now was not winning a court case, but reclaiming the intangible elements of trust, safety, and normalcy for Benjamin. We began small rituals: bedtime stories, Saturday mornings in the park, cooking simple meals together. Each ritual was a stitch in the fabric of security we were rebuilding, each act a message that we were safe, together, and loved. And yet, beneath the surface, a quiet anger persisted. The system had allowed a child to be taken, even temporarily, without cause, and it could happen again. The thought haunted me, a constant reminder that errors in bureaucratic systems are never just paperwork. They are lived experiences, traumatic and irreversible in their emotional consequences. I began speaking with other parents, joining support groups, advocating for awareness of the psychological impacts of wrongful or mistaken removals. My voice, once confined to private fear, now sought to transform the fear of one family into awareness for many. Benjamin, slowly, began to speak more openly about his experience. He did not remember everything. Children often forget in fragments, but enough remained to remind me of the depth of his fear. "Mom," he whispered one evening, "I thought you would not come back." His words pierced me, sharp and irretrievable. I held him close, whispering reassurances, promising him that he was safe, that I was never leaving. But I also understood the profound truth. The experience had changed him, had altered the lens through which he viewed the world, had instilled a wariness that would take years to fully dissipate.